U.S. punishes firms over Ukraine ammo. The U.S. Army has begun the process of imposing fines on Northrop Grumman and Global Military Products for delays in delivering artillery ammunition to Ukraine. The Army Contracting Command is acting on the recommendations of the Pentagon's Inspector General, who found serious violations in the timing of order fulfillment, according to Bloomberg. It is Friday, February 6, 2026. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. Join me in the latest program by Defense Report for the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover, well, it's a huge story. The massive shift in U.S. defense acquisition, the $1.1 million fines, and what this actually means for the war in Ukraine.
It really feels like the hangover is finally kicking in, doesn't it?
The hangover, that's a good way to put it.
For years, the defense sector has been operating on this, this peacetime rhythm. It's been slow, steady, very risk-averse. And now, all of a sudden, the lights are on, the music stopped, and the Pentagon is handing out speeding tickets.
And they're not small tickets, at least not symbolically. We're looking at a system that's trying to pivot from what feels like a bureaucratic stroll to an all-out sprint.
It has to.
I want to start right at that headline. U.S. Army fines defense contractors. It sounds like something you'd just scroll past. It sounds like paperwork. But when you really dig into this Inspector General's report from November 2025, the details are, they're quite alarming.
Oh, yeah.
We aren't talking about a shipping container getting stuck in customs for a week.
No, not at all. We are talking about a systemic failure to deliver. The Inspector General reviewed 7 specific contracts for Ukraine aid. And 5 of them.
5 out of 7.
5 out of 7 had what they call serious violations on timeliness. The delays weren't days or weeks. They were up to 18 months.
18 months. I just want people to try and visualize that for a second.
That's hard to grasp.
An artillery commander in, say, the Sumy region places a request for 155-millimeter shells. He's rationing fire, counting every single round, thinking help is on the way because the order was placed. And the shells that were supposed to arrive a year and a half ago still haven't even left the factory floor in America. I mean, that gap in time isn't just an inconvenience. That is lives lost. That's territory ceded.
That's the reality of it, and that's exactly why the Army Contracting Command is coming down so hard on these 2 companies, Northrop Grumman and Global Military Products. They're proposing fines that total about $1.1 million.
Okay, so I have to play devil's advocate here because I know our listeners are doing the math right now. Northrop Grumman is a titan. They do billions in revenue. $1.1 million. Isn't that just a rounding error?
It is.
Does a fine that size actually change behavior, or is it just the cost of doing business for them?
Financially, it's negligible. You're absolutely right. The total contract value across these audits is $1.9 billion.
Wow.
So $1 million is, it's pennies. But in the world of government contracting, you have to look at the scarlet letter effect.
The reputational hit.
It's massive. When the Pentagon publicly fines you for serious violations, it flags you in the system, it tanks your past performance rating, which is, a key metric for winning future contracts.
Oh, I see.
It signals to investors, to the board, that management is failing to execute. It's a warning shot across the bow of the entire industry that says, look, the era of indefinite delays is over. The Pentagon is basically saying, we don't care how big you are not immune.
It's so interesting you mentioned the 2 companies because they represent 2 totally different sides of this industry. You have Northrop, the traditional manufacturer. They bend metal, they fill the shells.
Right.
And then you have Global Military Products.
Yeah.
Who are they? Because they don't have factories in the same way, do they?
No, and that is a crucial distinction to make. Global Military Products is a broker, a middleman.
Okay.
When the war in Ukraine kicked off, the U.S. didn't have enough standard NATO ammo to spare.
Right.
We needed non-standard ammo Soviet calibers like 152 millimeter, 122 millimeter.
Stuff we don't make.
Exactly. So the Pentagon hired brokers like them to scour the globe. Places like Bulgaria, Pakistan, you name it, to buy up existing stockpiles.
So Northrop is getting fined for not making it fast enough, and Global Military Products is getting fined for not finding it fast enough.
In essence, yeah. And the numbers here are just staggering. As of late 2025, the backlog of unfulfilled orders, so money that's been allocated but has produced nothing, sat at $907 million.
Nearly $1 billion of lethal aid that only exists on paper.
It's trapped. $1 billion trapped in limbo.
And the Army is actually considering canceling some of those orders just to get the cash back, right? Because the contract is just a dead weight at this point.
They have to. In a war of attrition, cash flow is ammunition flow. If a broker can't deliver, you have to cut them loose and give that money to someone who can.
This whole broker issue, it actually leads us directly into another story that broke recently. I think it paints a really vivid picture of those chaotic early days of the war.
You're talking about the Swiss arbitration case.
Exactly. It went largely unnoticed by the mainstream press, but it's just fascinating.
This is the case with Ukraine's Ministry of Defense and a U.S. company. It's likely OTL Firearms and Imports, though the reports are a bit coy on the name.
Right.
But the mechanism is what matters. Ukraine won an award of over $18 million.
And this wasn't U.S. aid money, was it? This was Ukraine's own cash.
That's the tragic part. Early in the invasion, Ukraine was desperate. I mean, truly desperate. They were emptying their own treasury, paying 100% upfront to anyone who promised artillery shells.
It paints such a picture. You can just imagine officials trying to find anyone who'd even pick up the phone. So let me guess. The broker took the money and didn't ship the shells.
They shipped about a third, maybe 30%. And when Ukraine asked for the rest, the company just started making excuses. They blamed political reasons. They claimed the contract terms had changed.
The usual stalling tactics?
The usual stalling tactics you see when a supplier has overpromised and underdelivered.
But the Swiss tribunal didn't buy it.
Not for a second. They looked at the evidence and said, there were no contract changes. You simply failed to deliver. It highlights the extreme risk of that Wild West procurement environment.
Yeah.
When you aren't buying from the manufacturer, when you introduce these layers of middlemen, you introduce friction. And in war, friction kills.
It's good to see Ukraine getting that money back. It validates their standing. But like we said, you can't fire a refund at a Russian tank. They need the metal.
They need the shells.
Which brings us to the core technical question. We are the United States. We're the arsenal of democracy. Why is a company like Northrop Grumman, with all its resources, 18 months late? Is it just incompetence, or is there some physical bottleneck we aren't seeing?
Well, it is rarely just incompetence. Usually it's chemistry. We need to talk about the energetics crisis.
Energetics. Okay, so if talking about the explosives themselves, I think most people assume you just, pour gunpowder into a tube and you're done.
If only it were that simple. Look, you can cast a steel shell casing anywhere. You can build a factory for that in 6 months. But a shell is just a paperweight without two things: the high explosive filler, usually TNT, and the propellant that shoots it out of the gun.
Okay.
The choke point right now, for everything, is a specific chemical called nitrocellulose.
Nitrocellulose. It sounds like something out of a high school chemistry lab, but it's the bottleneck for the entire NATO alliance.
It is. It's often called gun cotton. It's made by treating cellulose fibers, usually cotton lint or wood pulp, with nitric acid. It's highly flammable, it's dangerous to transport, and it's environmentally nasty to produce.
So because of regulations and cost cutting, we spent the last 30 years just outsourcing it.
We outsourced it. We outsourced the ignition switch of our own artillery.
Unbelievable. Who are we buying it from?
The usual suspects, unfortunately. A huge chunk of the world's industrial-grade cotton lint comes from China. But for the refined nitrocellulose, we rely on imports from France, the Czech Republic, South Korea, and Canada. We have no domestic resiliency.
So if a factory in France has a strike or a container ship gets delayed from Korea, Northrop Grumman's production line in the U.S. just grinds to a halt.
Exactly. It's a domino effect. And it's not just the propellant. Let's talk about TNT. Do you know how many major TNT producers there are in the NATO region that feed this whole supply chain?
I would assume maybe a handful. One per major country.
One.
Oh.
No. One major facility in Poland. That is a single point of failure for an entire alliance's ammunition strategy.
That is terrifyingly fragile.
It is. So when we ask why things are 18 months late, it's because we let the industrial base atrophy. We optimized for efficiency. What's the cheapest way to buy TNT in peacetime instead of for redundancy?
Major General John Rain used a phrase that really stuck with me. He called our ammo factories one-trick ponies.
It's a perfect description. Most of the U.S. government-owned ammo plants date back to World War II. They were designed with a 1940s logic. Build a massive assembly line that does one thing incredibly fast.
So if you need 1,155mm shells, they are great.
Perfect. But if the war shifts and suddenly you need 120mm mortar rounds, you can't just flip a switch.
You have to rip out all the machines and retool the entire factory.
Which takes months, if not years. Meanwhile, look at the adversary. Russia has pivoted to a total wartime economy. They are pumping out roughly 250,000 rounds a month.
And NATO.
NATO's target, the goal we are hoping to hit in 2026, is 267,000. We are straining every muscle just to reach parity with what Russia is doing comfortably right now.
And Russia's doing this with help from North Korea, Iran.
While tapping into Chinese supply chains for all those raw materials, it's
It's a sobering comparison. It really highlights that we've been sleepwalking while the other side was sprinting. But this brings us to the potential solution. We've talked about the problem, but there is a new strategy coming from the top. We have to talk about Secretary of War Pete Hegseth.
And you notice that title shift in the report's Secretary of War. It implies a return to a pre-1947 mindset, a war footing. He issued a memo on November 7th, 2025, that is essentially trying to blow up the old way of doing business.
He's calling it the Warfighting Acquisition System, or WAS. And he wants to replace the old day, the Defense Acquisition System. I love a good acronym battle, but what's the actual difference here? Is this just rebranding, or is it substantial?
The difference is the philosophy. The day, the old system, was built on compliance. Its main goal was to prevent fraud and ensure fairness, which meant checking a million boxes and holding endless meetings. It prioritized process over product.
Right.
The new system, has a single metric: speed to delivery.
So move fast and break things, but for tanks and missiles.
In a way, yes. One of the biggest changes is how he's organizing the people in charge. He's shifting from program executive officers, PEOs, to portfolio acquisition executives, or PAEs.
Okay, let's decode that. PEO versus PA. Why does that one letter change matter?
A PEO in the old system was often siloed. They managed one specific program. They had to ask permission from multiple committees to move money around. The new PAEs are being designed as mini CEOs. They have total authority over their budget.
So if a drone isn't working, they can cut the funding today and move it to a radio that is working tomorrow.
Instantly. No committee.
That sounds incredibly efficient, but also kind of risky. But I guess in war, the biggest risk is moving too slowly.
Precisely. And speaking of risk, Hegseth is proposing a rule change that is going to make defense contractors sweat. It's called losers pay.
This one blew my mind. Explain how this works, because this tackles the legal gridlock we see so often.
Right now in the U.S., if a company loses a bid, say Lockheed wins a contract and Boeing loses, Boeing will almost always protest the decision. They file a legal complaint.
And everything freezes.
Everything freezes. A stop work order comes down for 100 days while the lawyers fight. Sometimes companies do it just to hurt their competitors' cash flow.
So the soldiers don't get the gear because the losing company is just stalling for time.
It's a tactic. Hegseth's losers pay rule says, go ahead and protest. But if you lose, if the protest is found to be frivolous, you have to pay the government's legal fees and costs.
That changes the entire calculation immediately.
Yeah.
You're not going to file a nuisance lawsuit if it's going to cost you $10 million.
It would clear the docket overnight. It removes the incentive to obstruct. Another pillar is commercial first. If you can buy it off the shelf, buy it. Don't spend 5 years inventing a military spec version that's obsolete by the time it gets to the field.
It just seems so obvious. Why haven't we been doing this for years?
Because the military-industrial complex is, well, it's addicted to custom specs. Custom specs mean proprietary parts. Proprietary parts mean you have a monopoly on maintenance for 20 years. Hegseth is trying to break that lock.
And he's setting up an economic defense unit, or EDU. This sounds almost like a venture capital firm for the Pentagon.
That's a great analogy. The EDU is designed to give loans, grants, purchase commitments to upstream suppliers, mining companies, shipyards, chemical plants before a war starts.
So you invest in the concrete plant now, so it's there when you need it.
Exactly. You don't wait for the bridge to collapse.
So the fines on Northrop and global military products, they aren't just punishments. They are the opening salvo of this whole new philosophy. This is the Warfighting Acquisition System in action.
That's it exactly. It's the warning shot. The message is, accountability is back. If you are late, you pay. If you protest frivolously, you pay. If you can't deliver, we will find someone who can.
It sounds great on paper. It really does. But we have to pivot back to the immediate reality, because while Washington is rearranging flowcharts, the clock is ticking in Ukraine.
And the situation on the ground is critical. While we're debating acquisition reform, Russia is pushing hard in the Sumy region. They're launching massive aerial attacks. And there's been so much controversy recently about the U.S. pausing certain shipments.
This is the stockpile pause we've been hearing about, the America First argument. Our own shelves are getting too empty, so we need to stop sending 155s and Patriots to Ukraine until we restock.
And from a purely logistical standpoint, the concern is valid. Our stockpiles are dangerously low because of those production bottlenecks we discussed. The nitrocellulose, the TNT, we have dug deep.
But for Ukraine, a pause is catastrophic.
It's a death sentence. There were reports of halts on Hellfire missiles, artillery shells, even air defense interceptors.
And Ukraine is saying, quite rightly, if you stop sending them, we lose. And if we lose, you're going to be fighting Russia yourselves in 5 years. That's the argument, that withholding aid now to save it for later actually makes the future threat worse.
That is the strategic reality. And that's why there is so much emphasis right now on the PURL program.
PURL. What is that mechanism?
It's basically a workaround. Since the U.S. is hesitant to draw down its own stocks further, PURL allows NATO allies to buy newly produced U.S. weapons for Ukraine.
So the Europeans are stepping up to pay the bill.
Exactly. To keep that production line moving toward Kyiv, Ukraine needs about $15 billion in U.S. hardware in 2026. This is how they're trying to get it.
It's a financial patch. But again, it brings us right back to the factory floor. You can have all the European money in the world. But if the factory takes 18 months to make the shell because they're waiting on chemicals from France, the money doesn't matter.
That is the crux of the issue. The fines are good for accountability. The refunds from the Swiss court are good for justice. But you cannot load a refund into a howitzer. Ukraine needs the physical product.
They need the Warfighting Acquisition System to actually work, and they need it to work now.
Now, not in 2 years when the new factories are finally built. Because the Russian industrial machine isn't waiting. They're getting help from China, from Iran. They are moving fast.
They are. Russia successfully pivoted to a wartime economy while we were still debating whether to even do it.
Now, the U.S. and Europe are waking up. We're moving from a peacetime bureaucracy to a wartime footing. But the question is, can we splint fast enough to make up for all the lost time?
It feels like we are at a definitive turning point. For years, the slogan was, support as long as it takes. But now we're seeing the cracks in the supply chain that make that promise incredibly difficult to keep.
We are seeing the cracks, but we are also finally seeing the repairs. The Hegseth reforms, the fines, the move to punish brokers who don't deliver, these are signs the system is fighting back against its own inertia.
It's realizing it can't support Ukraine or defend itself with a business-as-usual mindset.
And it's about time.
It really is.
Yeah.
You know, thinking about those fines again, $1.1 million. In the grand scheme of a billion-dollar war, it is nothing. But if it marks the end of an era where a defense contractor can be a year and a half late with zero consequences, then maybe it's the most important $1 million the Pentagon has ever collected.
It has to be. Because the alternative is that the arsenal of democracy runs dry while the authoritarian powers ramp up. And that is a world none of us want to live in.
Absolutely not. And that is why we will keep watching this space. It's not just about contracts and fines. It's about the front line of freedom in Europe. You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Go and subscribe to Defense Reports, your trusted source for timely, in-depth military and defense analysis. We'll see you next time. Keep supporting us so we can continue bringing you the latest developments from Ukraine and around the world.